How can you position yourself for greater impact with your clients, whether you're an internal change leader or external consultant? That's one of the questions brand and positioning expert Betsy Jordyn and I explored on my Chain of Learning podcast, episode 41. But we didn't want to just end the conversation there. In this bonus conversation, Betsy and I dive in further to explore the business case for positioning as a consultant, continuous improvement practitioner, or coach, and give insights into how lean consultants and change leaders can help reposition the value of a lean transformation in your organization. It's time to stop being just the doer of improvement to a strategic and transformational change partner for your clients. And be sure to go back and watch or listen to Chain of Learning episode 41 for more tips and insights from Betsy and me. It's time to dive into the bonus conversation. Making the business case for work can be really challenging. It's easy to go in and respond to the request of the client, whether or not they're an internal client or an external client. Like, yeah, I can do the thing. What I've really learned from you, Betsy, about how to reframe, pivot that conversation and really take ownership on understanding what's the real business outcome and problem that they need to solve. And then what's the right, then I can help shape the how, the methodology to get there. So let's talk a little bit more about that because I've learned so much from working with you on that framing and the business case positioning.
So I think a lot of the big business case positioning begins with understanding this, really getting the client to articulate the strategic problem. So I'm going to use one of the examples of one of your clients and that I discovered after the fact that I think we could have done like even more to create the business case. So you work with a particular healthcare organization. And when they came to you, they were doing a big leadership event and they wanted you to come in and facilitate this big, I think it was like a 2 day leadership event with all their leaders and get them all excited about the change that they were trying to embark on, which is great. You know, you can go straight into like, okay, let me just land that because it looks like a keynote in some form or fashion. But really, what was going on for that organization is like they were coming out of COVID and their particular organization was suffering in every particular level. Like they were struggling with patient outcomes, all the efficiency outcomes, all the financial outcomes. Like it was in the tank. And this particular executive was specifically brought in to turn all of that around. So, in terms of like the business case isn't necessarily around the value of the workshop. The business case was around like, what's the value of solving this problem? You know, really quantifying, like, if we can turn this around. So, like, just imagine if this particular healthcare can turn around these results so they can go from a negative this in their customer satisfaction to a positive, how does that translate to dollars? If they can turn these patient outcomes from here to there, what does that translate in terms of like dollars and just like psychic value around like, this is what our mission is? You could go through all of those and then ask the question, like, okay, if this transformation are you going to go through? If you do it on your own, how long will it take you to get there? And then if you bring me in, now how do I add value? And so we talked to this particular leader afterwards to get a testimonial, and he was so primed to give a recommendation that, you know, and it was hard for him to really see, like, wow, I really turned this entire organization in a fraction of the time because I work with Katie. Like, that's the power of it is I got this team on board, aligned, moving into this direction. So all of these negative got turned around in a fraction of the time that they would have done on their own.
Yeah.
That's the business case.
Yeah, and what's hard is going when you're to front load that, right? And to pull that out. And again, a lot of the acceleration was the leadership and what they were doing too. I like to say I'm just one, I was an accelerator, truly a catalyst for change, but they had to take that and so much that they were doing as well. It's like because of the work we did together and I came and did 2 back-to-back years of leadership retreats because they were seeing so much value. I mean, some of the managers came and said, just even because of the sessions that Katie did, I really completely changed from being a command and control leader to one that was engaging my team. She said, I truly broke my telling habit. And this has allowed me to do so much more. And a lot of the leaders were like, yeah, me too. And so that for me gives me so much energy. And it's like, okay, so how do I then communicate that up front to other clients about it's not just a workshop, right? It's a transformational experience that they need to be going through.
You don't communicate that. What you communicate is if they say to you, I want you to do a workshop where we're going to move our leaders from command and control to more coaching leaders.
Yeah.
And it's like you say, that's awesome. So, but if those behaviors change, so
Yeah.
tell me a little bit more about the command and control. You don't do it in generic, you do it in specific. So tell me a little bit more about how your command and control leaders is having an impact. So, how's it impacting your employee retention, your employee performance?
Yeah.
How's it affecting your processes and your product? And how's it affecting everything? And you get them to quantify the business case.
Yeah.
So, going back to that particular client example, it wouldn't be putting it in isolation to front to back. Now we know, but they knew then when they were doing this lean transformation that they were in serious trouble. They wouldn't have brought this leader in the first place.
Yeah.
And so it's getting that conversation teed up and discussed. So tell me a little bit more. If your patient outcomes are like this, tell me about the impact. Tell me about the
Yeah.
impact to the mission, and all of that stuff. And then tell me about the direct impact to your bottom line. If your wait times are this and you need them to be this, what's the impact? So
Yeah.
you always have to take the client from whatever they ask for the solution to the behaviors, whatever
Yeah.
the behaviors are, get it to the business outcomes. And then whatever the business outcomes are, that you translate it to dollars, you translate it into money. And we could quantify that in the front end, even if you just get one thing. Like, even if
Mm.
you can't get the whole kit and caboodle, but if you can get that one executive, using that one as an example, let's just say we take wait times.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, wait times is abysmal. We want to do this transformation to get wait times less. It's like, what's the difference? Like, well, it's going to affect headcount. It's going to
Yeah.
affect, our productivity. There's dollars
Yeah.
against all of them, even if you just can get that one. But then when you get to the other side, you're starting to have that conversation.
Yeah.
So when you're doing the testimony on the other side, like if somebody comes to you and say, "Oh my God, I'm not a command and control leader anymore. I'm much more of a coaching leader." And it's like, that is so great. What difference had it make?
Yeah.
So now you're asking questions. Tell me about what you're noticing. How are your employees behaving differently that they weren't before? What kind
Yeah.
of innovation are you starting to see? What kind of employee, service that are they giving to customers because of that? Like, track it to the outcomes.
This is a really important point too, because a lot of the lean and continuous improvement, process improvement teams in organizations are really struggling with how to articulate their value. So really also their position within the organization. So not being the doer of all the improvement work, but being that person by the side that's helping the leaders do the work. But also, we're seeing teams be decimated when new leadership comes on because they don't see the monetary ROI value. And so I think a lot of lean folks have it, and I know I did too. You don't want to, we've been so pigeonholed as cost cutters because of the word lean for historical purposes that we've pivoted away from talking about return on investment and the value or the business outcomes. But this is so essential. We have to be able to tie the changes from a leadership behavior, to what Betsy said there, to operational outcomes, and then how you're effectively doing that. So it's not that we want to just be waste cutters and cost cutters. That's not what lean's about. Then how do we tie the behavior change to the business outcomes? And that has to be owned by the leader. So I think this is a really important conversation that, I've been really working with several, like right now with some change leader teams, about how are they really articulating the higher level value in the organization, not just from the project work, but truly from creating this cultural transformation.
So I think as an industry, lean is not perceived as doing leadership coaching. Like when we first started, so I'm an OD consultant by background. And when you started talking about like the leadership stuff and the culture change, I'm like, like you're in our sandbox. Like that's not like that. I never ever thought of lean in that particular way,
Mm.
ever. And I'm in the space. And then after working with you for a while, then I understood, like, oh, when you go to Japan, there's a whole different perspective on lean, eliminating waste and the people. And like there's a whole different heart to
Yeah.
this lean field that people don't know about. So it's almost like you need a new word for, if I were, let's say I was running a lean organization, I would rename it something else.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it lean. I
I
would
know.
call it I would call it something else, but
I
I
know.
wouldn't
I
I
talked to
wouldn't call it that.
I know. I talked to Jim Womack, in episodes, I think 37 and 38 about, I think it was episode 38, about that very question. His team in the 90s came up with the term lean. And yes, in some ways it's done a real disservice because people think lean and mean and all the cost cutting. But then we debated, like, what if people aren't seeing the holistic side of what Toyota had really been doing from the human element. And it almost doesn't matter what the word is. It's like, how do we convey the meaning to whatever word we put there? But I agree. Lean has been, unfortunately, branded the wrong way because of it needs a rebrand, Betsy, because
It
of the way it's been approached and some of those failure points of lean that Jim and I talk about.
I think that lean is so much more powerful. Like if like not to get political, but it's like I see a lot of stuff that's going on with cost cutting and I'm like, "Oh, I wish that there was like a bunch of OD people who knew about org design and I wish they were partnering really closely with a bunch of lean people because we know how to get this stuff done correctly."
Yeah.
Like we know the impact. Like processes are delivered by people, and and processes ultimately serve people, but organizations don't know. One of the things that I was taught early on when I was at Disney, my first client system was Animal Kingdom, and they were sort of in this like rebellious kind of time, and they told me like at the beginning that if I was going to be like my boss who was at Animal Kingdom before me, they were going to do what they did to him, which is he brought up any OD lingo, they would jokingly but literally take off his tie and tie him to the chair, and say like you cannot use this lingo. And so like I had to learn early on, like for years on my website I never said I was an OD consultant. I think this is the first time when my website relaunches that I'm even mentioning my organization development masters or my organization development experience because I've
Mm,
been trained so much that I have to Trojan horse everything I do.
yeah.
And so there's part of it is like, well, don't, it's like if you're in an organization, you're not there to just say, oh, okay, how do I show that lean is valuable and you should keep me? It's more around like, how do we create value?
Mm,
But you do need, I would go to all your support partners. I would go to like, if I were in charge of a lean organization, I would go to HR, OD, L&D. I would start forming meetings of like, hey, we're the people who all care about the same thing. We all want to create people-centered learning or you guys care about people-centered learning organizations. You care about the learning part. We all care about the people-centered side, the human-centric side. We all care about sustainability, but it's like, okay, what's the role that we're all playing in this? And do
yeah.
some education of your partners because I can't figure out for the life of me after all of these years in the field that it took really reading your Japan study trip testimonials, or now it's the Japan leadership
Leader
transformation experience. It took until reading through all of those to really understand, like, wow, this field is amazing. I
mm.
wish I would have known. I wish I would have partnered more. I wish I would have known. I didn't know. I just put you in the box of productivity and IE.
Yep, and I think that that's a positioning challenge that lean teams or continuous improvement teams or operational excellence teams have, and this is where getting pigeonholed as the process and tools efficiency folks, where that's a part of it. Of course, we're there to help the organization improve process, but there's so much more around the leadership and the heart side as well when it's done right. And so it's really how do we like reposition that? And I remember early on in both two of the healthcare organizations I was working in that I was, in these process improvement roles where we did spend time partnering or trying to bring on board and collaborate with our the OD team. And we were able to do that fairly successfully at the first organization that I was at. But over the course of years, and then it ended up then collaborating on delivering leadership training and what was the part that we were teaching and then what were supplemental parts that the OD team maybe had some additional training, but we realized it had to be a connected a connected thing. They couldn't be separate. It had to be the way that we're doing it. And so I see too often that it gets siloed and broken apart, and then that becomes confusing for the people in the organization too.
See, the way I look at lean now is like you're where the rubber hits the road. Like OD people can kind of talk theoretically about like, okay, organization, business strategy, organization strategies, people strategies, holistic, they all need to be aligned. L&D, really focuses on the leadership development, kind of like the bigger picture skills. But then it seems like without lean, this stuff doesn't come to life. Like
Mm,
this is where everything actually becomes real. Like this is where all these philosophies, like how do we get these leaders to behave? And it's like embedded in a different way.
mm,
So there probably is some sort of process, but I would look at the organization. This is where if you were within an organization, like just ask people like, what are the problems that you usually think of when you think of us? But then at the other side is like when we talk about the business case for what the value of like what you bring and what your clients bring is you have tactical I understand you don't wanna be associated with cost effectiveness and all of the productivity stuff, like, I get it because it's just stripping away the heart,
Mm.
but you at least have it. Like, you have it. Don't throw the baby out with the
Yep.
bathwater. It's that plus. But
Yes.
OG people can't claim it to that
Yep.
level.
Yep.
HR people can't claim it to that level. Like, we can't claim, like, you have a claim to, like, really tangible
Mm.
business results. So use it.
And this is exactly why you and I have been talking so much, and why I have my Catalyst Change Leader model, because sometimes when people are taught lean, it is led with the tools. I mean, this is my own journey. I learned the tools first, but I knew that there was a heart there, and I had to up level on my facilitation skills, my coaching skills, my political navigation skills, how I was actually speaking that language of the business and being a knowledgeable business expert, not just leading with the methodology. And it's so powerful to take the technical side, as you said, because we need that. That's actually a differentiator, and pair it with the social influence skills to really, really then create that holistic, unified, approach, and then leverage the other skills within organizations that people have, like OD or others, to be even more effective on that.
And really understand, like, this is your people, like, this is where the rubber hits the road. Like,
Yeah.
this is when you could talk about culture change, but culture doesn't change until the leaders on the front line and their behaviors change. So we could talk about, like, executives all day long, like,
Mm,
okay, you're going to change, but how do you embed it all the way through? OD people aren't going to do that. L&D people aren't going to do it in
mm,
that kind of way. This is where you're hooking process to behaviors. This
yeah.
is where it becomes realized. And I think also this is why people need to go to Japan, with you for the transformational experience. Is it There's very few disciplines. Like, if I were talking HR people, it's like, well, where's our field birthed? Like, where's our whole industry created? It's like, well, we just kind of came out of, like, personnel, and there's no, like, deeper meaning. And I think that's why
Mm,
your book resonates so much, and I think that's why the experience resonates so much. Is there's this whole deeper cultural heart behind it, and it's just a matter of, like, now how do we create more words to express it, and how do
mm.
we articulate that?
And that gets back to the concept of positioning. So how do you use the words to position to position it in the right way, in the right frame, so that people really understand what it is and how you can help.
Or maybe it's just like, hey, how there's, like, all these values on the board, like, I might say something like that. Like, so when you go in an organization and you see all these values on the break room wall, or you see all of these leadership expectations in a binder, and it just, like, it kind of means nothing, and you just see,
Mm,
like, there's a huge disconnect. Like, what we do is we make those values and those behaviors come to life. And we do this
mm,
by really integrating it at the detailed process level around how work actually gets done and what the leaders do
mm,
that support how work gets done. And as a result, these values become a lived reality, and that we are able to create these cultures. Like, you could start with something like that, like, start with the so when, and just tell the stories in
mm,
a very conversational sort of way. When leaders, like, are told, like, oh, I have to get more done with less, and it just feels like everybody's just working too hard and they don't know what to do.
yeah.
What we do is we figure out how to streamline processes in such a way that it creates better outcomes for products or customers, and
Mm.
do so in a way that makes the employee experience more enjoyable. And as a result, you not only get more, you don't get just more done with less, you actually improve the organization, create innovation, blah blah blah. You could tell those stories.
And it's not just saying, like, my title. It's the stories of really what is the problem you're trying to solve, and that gets back to what we're really trying to do is internal change or external change leaders. Like, how are you helping, and what's the problem that you're helping with? So
Like,
we could,
I look at
yeah.
it when I was at Disney. One of the things that was an expectation is, if you're ever walking in the park, either whenever you're there or you're not
Mm,
even working, you have to pick up trash. Like, that was a leadership expectation, that everybody had to pick up
mm,
trash. So if you take, like, that kind of leadership expectation that really did get embedded from top to down, everybody does it. But you think about all the other behaviors, that's what you guys do. Because
mm,
that creates the culture.
yeah.
Like, what people actually do is the culture.
Yes.
Anyway.
Right. No, it's so powerful. Well, I love this additional conversation we had, especially how to position lean and continuous improvement within an organization, which is so important. And then how those internal change leaders can move from being the lean doers or the continuous improvement doers to really that transformational change leader and the skills that we need to do that. And positioning is such an incredible, important part of that journey as well. So thank you, Betsy. We'll talk soon. If you've enjoyed this bonus conversation with me, Katie Anderson, and positioning expert Betsy Jordyn about how to position yourself and the transformation you envision for lean and continuous improvement in your organization, be sure to watch or listen to Chain of Learning episode 41, where she and I dive into specifics about how you can effectively uplevel your positioning and why it's so critical. And also go back and listen to Chain of Learning episode 40, where I share 3 simple shifts that you can immediately use to break free of the doer trap. And if you enjoy this content, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more insights about leadership and leading change, and follow my Chain of Learning podcast on either YouTube or your favorite audio podcast channel. Thanks for listening in and being a link in my chain of learning today. This is Katie Anderson. Have a great day.